Welcome, fans of Star Trek, to episode 3 of the Captain's Yacht, the podcast that takes you on a tour of Star Trek The Next Generation, episode by episode. Join us this week as we board the Captain's Yacht for a 3-episode excursion into TNG's first season. Today we're going to look at Lonely Among Us, Justice, and The Battle. I am your host, Scholar Beta, at Scholar Beta on all social media, and I'm joined by my co-host, Captain Kanaka.
Hello, hello.
And without further ado, we just want to remind you that this is a podcast put together by 2 teachers, designed as an experiment in how to create a podcast. We are striving to learn by doing, and we just want to model students getting out there, getting messy, and trying to put together a product and learn from that.
Excellent. I'm really happy about that. And as we're learning and as we're experimenting, I have a few announcements to make on my end, on Captain Kanaka's end. If a 90-minute episode is too long for you folks, we could talk about Star Trek until this pandemic is probably over. We could easily do that. But we've attempted to reduce ourselves to 30 minutes an episode now, which totals 90 minutes total. We're going to experiment with that a little bit more today. But if that's too heavy a task for you to listen to, for some people it is, please know that there are Lite Episodes that are now available, in which I go through and I break it down episode by episode. And if you want, for example, to listen to our review of Lonely Among Us and The Battle, but maybe not Justice, you can do that now. And those get sent out about the same time the classic episodes do. And I'm extremely excited to announce something that's coming soon. I mention it in my little intro to the Lite Episodes, called Deluxe Episodes, which are small 5-minute vignettes or segments of our episodes done with video footage that's spliced in the interest of differentiation for students who have a firm understanding of how to do podcasts and want to do something more. We have that available to them. So with that said, little bit of housekeeping here. Thank you to the commenters. We've gotten a few good comments. Thank you very much. Mahalo nui loa. Now, considering we are in the beginning of developing the show, we're curious for feedback here. So either at the mid-season point, which should be a couple episodes from now, because at 3 Next Generation episodes per episodes we should be about halfway through season 1 and a couple episodes. So either at the midpoint or the end of season 1, we plan on taking a brief respite from our review of Next Generation. Season 1 is, it's a tall order, I think. What do you think, dear scholar? Yeah, it's...
First of all, I'm just honestly grateful to be on this journey with you, my friend. I'm really loving going back and look at these. I think every time we meet, we have an idea for another special episode. And so I think that's great. I think we're going to look to the comments to see what other material you all are interested in discussing, breaking down, analyzing. I'm going to keep my eyes on the episodes in season 1 and really understanding and breaking those down. And to be honest, I'm completely flexible, and I'm ready to have a conversation about pilots. I'm ready to have a conversation about maybe even we do one. I was thinking, Captain, where it's a TNG kickoff, where TNG then kicks them off into DS9, and we maybe talk about that, or TNG kicking off Voyager or something like that. I don't know. We'll get into that a little bit later. But hey, I think the most important thing, let's listen to the commenters. Let's listen to the subscribers, see what they want to do. But you and me, let's bring our expertise on the episodes, and then we'll see where we should branch out from there. I don't know if that answered your question, but
no, it absolutely does. So you, the dear viewer, if you have an idea that you want us to discuss, we brought up last episode, briefly reviewing all the pilot episodes from the Roddenberry Berman era. Our resident scholar brought that up. I think that's a great idea. If you'd rather we talk about Picard, that is to say the CBS All Access show, we can do that. If you want to hear what our opinions are on the Kelvin universe, we can do that too. Anything you want to come up with, folks. We're
Yeah, we're
interested
here.
in
We're here to talk Trek.
hearing your input, and that's what we got. So, with that in mind, are we ready to venture into our next episode, Scholar Beta?
I think so. You want me to kick it off?
If you would, I'll set the timer and we'll see where we go from there.
All right, transporters locked in. Just tell me when we're ready.
Hit it.
Let's get this thing started with episode 7 of Star Trek The Next Generation, Lonely Among Us, stardate 41249.3. So this episode starts off, let's talk about the premise and what's going down here. I really enjoyed writing the premise for this episode, so here we go. A non-corporeal entity runs loose on the Enterprise, mind-controlling first Worf, then the senior staff, and eventually overtaking the captain himself. Meanwhile, the non-mind-controlled crew members of the Enterprise struggle to keep a delicate peace between members of two alien worlds, the Antikins and the Sele, bound for a diplomatic conference. So, my friends, I wrote that on purpose. So if this feels like it's a kind of convoluted smashing two different plots together that do they have anything actually in common? Well, that might be one of the talking points we get in here in just a second. So before we get into and break down the plot even more, I just think this genre is classic trope. It is the Enterprise is moving through space and we hit a space anomaly. In this case, a non-corporeal Enterprise that's going to start, or a non-corporeal creature that's going to start mind-controlling members of the USS Enterprise. But what else do we have? What are some other tropes going on in the background? We have the Federation as diplomats. This is going to be in 20 or 30 episodes of Trek, TNG, etc. The Federation, they're legendary diplomats. The Enterprise D is the greatest diplomatic conference room suite of all time. So we're going to be spending some time there. What else we have going on? We have mind control and body control. Classic. We're going to get that a whole bunch. We're going to have an impersonated Captain Picard. The captain isn't himself. Do we need to relieve him of duty? That discussion's going to happen a whole bunch. And then I'm calling this last trope the non-corporeal among us. We're going to get a lot of non-corporeal entities in TNG. And, for better or for worse, we're going to have to deal with them as they run amok on the Enterprise. So, Captain, why don't you break down some things that were going on behind the scenes?
Excellent. So, with that in mind, I mentioned this last episode, but the first season of Star Trek The Next Generation had 30 writers, which is an unheard of turnover. It is insane. And one of the reasons why that first season had such a high turnover is because Gene Roddenberry had a long list of restrictions for the writers. In this Next Generation universe, he had a series of dictums and a series of rules which you could not break under any circumstances. Some of these restrictions include, as told by head writer Maurice Hurley, no money. There's no evil. Yeah.
Ooh.
No jealousy.
Oh.
No tension, either between the characters themselves or in a situation. And characters cannot have conflict between themselves, and no individual goals or ideas.
Whoa.
Yeah. So a lot of Star Trek fans, and this just popped up, and a lot of people justly criticized that none of these tropes were a thing, or none of these dictums were a thing in the original series. And it caused a lot of writers to chafe. Case in point, we have 30 writers having a turnover on the original show. I mean, not the first season. And you have writers such as DC Fontana chafing at this idea, and her quote is so perfect here. She says, "If our people are perfect and have no problems or conflict between them, then there is no story here." Yes, Scholar Beta.
And I was just thinking, I teach writing, I teach some basic fiction writing as well, and characters wanting something but being blocked from that want, that conflict, that's basically character writing 101. So yeah, I can definitely see how some of the classical training that these writers maybe have gone through in writing characters and developing theme through conflict would be very tested by this list of requirements for an episode. we're going to see some of these stick more than others. The no money, kind of, the no evil, definitely not outside the Federation and even inside the Federation sometimes. I don't know about jealousy, but tension for sure is going to run between characters. The whole Picard not being good with children thing that I'm obsessed with talking about right now, that seems like tension. So
Yeah,
that's interesting. I'm glad you brought up that list. That's really fascinating. I think we should keep an eye on that as we go through these episodes and get further from the Roddenberry era. That's going to happen around season 2, 3.
definitely around season 2, 3. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that some writers, such as David Gerald, actually liked these ideas. He liked these restrictions because it put him particularly in a new spot. And to a certain degree, DC Fontana agreed to them because in this particular script, which she wrote, she's under the name DC Fontana and not another pen name. So with that, with that in mind, this kind of ties into what works about this episode.
Yeah,
And
take us away.
yeah, all right. So this episode is great at working around those restrictively utopian guidelines in a way that gives characters some of the layers of conflict, tension, to a certain degree, jealousy, without breaking Roddenberry's commandments. There's evil afoot on the ship. There's a mysterious murder, but it's of alien origin. And at the end, you find out that it's an alien life form trying to get home. So it's not so much evil as it is a misunderstanding. On the surface, it appears evil, but it unfolds over time. Something's not right with Picard. Lots of different problems. The entire second half of that episode is dealing with a potential evil organism dictating what Picard does. But it's okay because he's possessed by an alien intelligence. Also, every character has something to do in a way that's more or less organic to their characters. Now, this is something at the beginning of season 1 still.
Point,
yeah. So Worf has something to do, and if I were to be so bold, forgive me, this is the most screen time Worf has had in an episode. I'm willing to bet that. Data channels Sherlock Holmes for the first time. That becomes a recurring bit in later episodes. It starts here. Because of my affection for Data being on the spectrum, I noticed something interesting. He actually changes his voice inflections while mimicking Sherlock Holmes. I do something similar on the spectrum. That's one of the ways by which I communicate. For example, if I'm meeting with a parent during parent-teacher conferences, I channel Picard and I isolate the rhythm of his voice and his vocabulary, and I use that to make a good impression.
Yeah.
So that's what works for me.
That's interesting that you say, you bring us into this discussion about Data, because Data taking on the persona of, Sherlock Holmes is actually quite funny. And it's really kind of inserted really quickly into this episode. And I kind of did a double take when I looked at it. I'm like, oh, is this the first time we get the Sherlock Holmes? I kind of forgot about this. And I think it's genuinely funny when Picard says, Mr. Data, let's proceed without the pipe. I think that's honestly, it's a horrible pipe too. It's like obviously a really cheap plasticky prop, but it's hilarious. I really appreciate that. But honestly, on a deeper level, I really appreciate that it begins to use Holmes' reasoning and deduction, right? That very famous quote, when other contingencies fail, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Like, that is going to be such an important framework for investigating mysteries that befall the Enterprise, that befall their planets. It's a great framework. And the fact that they tie Data to Sherlock Holmes, I really appreciate that. So I think that actually works really nicely in this episode, even though, we do get him using some of that reasoning to solve this. He'll use it more in other episodes. One of my favorites of all time being Clues, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But just very much love that episode. So yeah, what else? What other character moments are going down in here, Captain? What's happening with some other members?
Troy does some psychology stuff. She does hypnosis. She does some insights into duality, which are a little bit more organic to who she is, a common criticism of her character. And as a person who teaches psychology, I tend to agree. Whenever she cites something in terms of psychology, it sounds very dry and from the manual without any kind of originality or flexibility. I don't
Oops.
know. Yep, oops. I don't know how that came to pass, but that criticism is extremely valid. But in this situation, it doesn't feel that way. It feels rather organic to her character, and she throws in a little bit of Betazoid stuff that makes it interesting. So
Hey, I got a question for you, Captain. If you,
yeah,
I don't want to put you on the spot here, but did they have Betazoids in the original series?
nope,
Okay, so
not to my
this is
knowledge.
like our first couple. We're developing this species, this power set, so to speak, that Betazoids have. We're developing this for the first time in TNG.
I'm going
Um,
to say with 90% certainty that they did not have Betazoids in original series. Now, considering
okay,
Roddenberry kind of has some revisionist tendencies, and that's a discussion for another time, in beta canon and stuff like that, it might be that there were Betazoids, but no, not in the original 70 odd episodes.
I just been paying attention to Troy here in these first couple episodes and really trying to think, okay, if you were a full Betazoid, would that totally break this television show? I actually have no problem with the restrictions on her feeling emotions. I think that's honestly really clever in a way to get a telepath slash a Betazoid into your story. So I was just curious. I really appreciate Troy and what they're going to do with that character as time goes on. Um, but I don't know. I was just curious about Betazoid Legacy if they had tried to use characters with similar powers in previous iterations of Trek. I know these are characters that they kind of are left over from the first motion picture, or they're based on those. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe there was an idea and it was able to develop into something a little more unique like a Betazoid. I don't know. I just think this question I'm going to go look into for our next episode as well. If I
I'm
can just say,
willing to
well, oh, go ahead.
go ahead
Sorry.
after you.
Oh no, I got nothing else on Troy. I was going to talk about one of the guest appearances on here, but what? Any final thoughts on Troy or the other characters that we get to see some development in?
Well, when you take a look at Encounter at Farpoint, there's a little 5 minute explanation of what Betazoids can do and what Troy can and cannot do. So that's a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
species and world building too. That furthers my argument that they weren't featured in the original series or the Kirk Spock era. So
Yeah, you're
uh,
right. That's a great scene actually, where the Groppler says, "Oh, you brought a Betazoid to this negotiation." I like how they react very strongly to a member of that species being in the room. I think that's really cool.
definitely. And Scholar Beta, you had a very eagle-eyed approach that I completely missed in terms of the guest star that you mentioned. Who is it?
Oh yeah. Okay, I'm gonna mess up this guy's last name, but I believe it's Mark Alameo or something like that. This guy who is gonna go on to play Gul Dukat in Deep Space Nine, one of my favorite villains of all time. Cardassians are really fascinating. As a really fascinating Trek species, and Gul Dukat is one of the most interesting villains. I've been watching, like I said, for subscribers who've been following us now, you know that I'm watching a lot of Deep Space Nine in the background because I don't want to get too far ahead in our TNG episodes, so I don't have like 30 on my mind when we're recording. But I am watching some Deep Space Nine, and Dukat is such a dynamic villain. On one hand, he's going on away missions with Kira. On the other, he's trying to assassinate his own daughter. It's just so great actor. I'm sorry that this had to be your first appearance in like a dog costume, Mark, but you did a great job. You did a great job, and the fact that you come back and you are Gul Dukat for the next, seven seasons of Deep Space Nine. I mean, that's awesome. Great actor, great actor.
Definitely. And that kind of segues. You mentioned the dog costume, and that kind of segues
Hmm.
into what doesn't. And I'll let you take this away, Scholar Beta.
Yeah, so just thinking about this from a writing standpoint, we got two plot threads here And if you can tell me how they're related, you're seeing something that I'm not. So in the A plot, you have these two hostile species on the Enterprise needing to reach the negotiation table before a skirmish between them breaks out. You have people in dog costumes and you have people in snake costumes. And on the other hand, you have this non-corporeal blue electricity entity running around the Enterprise mind controlling people. So, Captain, I'm asking you, and again, I don't want to put you on the spot, my friend. I didn't give you time to write a detailed book report on this, but where is the thematic or literal connection between these two? Diplomacy, mind control. What do you think? Can you stretch something for this?
If I were to guess, it would be that the Federation attempts to resolve conflicts in a quote unquote more civilized and rational way than the other two species do. And because it would have been so easy, and they bring up the M word mutiny at one point in the second half of the episode regarding Picard, but they don't they don't do that. They resort to their trying to empirically figure out what's going on with these characters, what's going on with Picard, and then at the very end, it all comes full focus. But in terms of the thematic connection, I would say that it would have to be juxtaposing how the Federation handles conflict versus how these two quote unquote less advanced societies do. So that's definitely
I'm gonna give you an A+ for that, my friend. That was nice. That's nice. So it's all about the juxtaposition and the handling of conflict. I like that. I like that.
If I were to guess, that's what they were going for. I wrote in my notes in another episode that we're going to review that one of the episodes coming up would do better with a more defined B plot. And then you take a look at this and go, as long as it thematically connects, that's an important thing. And there's a big argument to be made that this doesn't thematically connect as well as it should.
Yes, I'm gonna go with, as far as themes or non-literal interpretations of the two plot. I'm gonna say that it's pretty threadbare.
Oh yeah.
But let's keep going. What else is up in this episode that doesn't quite strike you as working?
Well, okay, so I made a connection in which I said the last outpost is basically the episode Arena, the original series episode Arena redressed. And there's a little bit of that in this episode, albeit not as obvious. For example, there is a would-be subplot involving the Ferengi bribing some of the delegates on the Enterprise to sabotage the conference at Parliament. This is almost identical to the plot of Journey to Babel, in which Orion's attempt to sabotage that conference by getting to one of the Andorian delegates. DC Fontana, who wrote this episode, said that was intentional. I don't know why, but they do bring it up. Also, there's a weird model of a classic original series shuttlecraft in the background of one of the conference rooms.
Oh, we're going to talk about that in our Enterprise interior.
So maybe I missed it, but they were. I was under the impression that they were considering admitting one of these into the Federation. Am I off on that?
Yeah, I honestly don't have any notes on that part. I'm not sure. I can't remember if they are or not. I just remember that this is negotiation. But right. Yeah, go ahead. What were you thinking along that line?
If that is true, if that assumption is true, the Antikins and the Soleil have absolutely no business being in the Federation based on their violent and aggressive antagonisms for each other. As we're going to see in future episodes, future civilizations will be denied membership in the Federation for far less.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about that.
Definitely. So go ahead, our resident scholar. What's going on with what doesn't work for you?
I think I really did hit upon just the connection, or the disconnect in my mind between those plots. The last thing I'm just going to say before we move on to Trek First and Facts is Captain Picard's Force Lightning, kind of the climax. So, there's this non-corporeal entity running around in the Enterprise. It's a small blue electricity, but by the time we get to the end of Act 4, we got to up the blue electricity because this is the big climax of the episode. So Picard's on the bridge, and he puts his hand on both the helm and the con, and then just they Photoshop in, for lack of a better verb, blue lightning that basically incapacitates the crew, and you can totally tell the crew has no idea what they're trying to react to. It's kind of amazing.
Yes, it
But
is.
it doesn't age well. I watched the clip in Blu-ray and on DVD. Yeah, I don't think the Blu-ray really adds anything.
It
So
doesn't.
they're always going to do strange things with non-corporeal entities in this show. For better or for worse, it's kind of an easy, quick special effects add-in. You don't need an elaborate costume or anything. But I'm going to say it doesn't work so well here. Well,
I
let's get
would
on to
agree.
the Trek first and facts, and let's round out this episode, my friend.
So,
What notes
so
you got for us here?
this is the first bottle episode or a bottle show in the history of Next Generation. For those of you who may not know, a bottle show is an episode in which the entire story takes place on pre-existing sets without any major guest stars. This keeps costs down. Case in point, everybody on the cruise, they stay on the Enterprise. They don't go to any other ship or any other planet. And again, it's great at keeping the costs down, which they needed at the beginning of that first season. There was several multi-million-dollar fall off on that. I can't believe we've gone 7 episodes without mentioning the great Michael Westmore. But
Yeah.
legendary makeup artist. He made the creature effects for the Antikins and the Soleil. Roddenberry didn't like the designs because it involved both species wearing elaborate head masks. Maybe a cost issue. I don't know. And with that in mind, do you have any other firsts, Scholar Beta, before we go into episode awards?
I think you basically covered it there. Let's hit up those awards.
So, and I offer a briefEkalamai, because for those of you who watched the end of Where No One Has Gone Before, I didn't technically mention the award by name, but this new award I'm creating is boldly going too far, where a concept is stretched to a level which completely undermines the universe.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which they resolve losing Picard at the end of the episode is completely nonsensical. At risk of spoiling an episode that's 35 years old almost. What happens is Picard, who's possessed by the alien, goes down to transporter and beams himself out into space.
Without a spacesuit on.
Without a spacesuit, exactly. And everybody thinks Picard is dead, and then they start seeing random P's appearing on the computer console. All the computer consoles, and then they realize Picard's transporter pattern is still in the main transporter computer, so they beam him back that way. And the fact that works definitely uncovers some extremely nonsensical and somewhat intense and disturbing existential connotations about the transporter. It's been done to death, but...
Absolutely. Other folks have talked about this endlessly, and actually it's going to come back with good old Thomas Riker much further down the line, like season 6 or 7, something like that. But yeah, at some point, Captain, we're going to have to talk about the fact that the transporters basically can allow for immortality in a type of like save state backups. Those of y'all who play emulators know what I mean. You play in an emulator of an old school game and you accidentally jump off a cliff and your character dies, so you just back it up a couple frames and then go again. That's basically what the transporter allows you to do. So yeah, like we were talking about in this episode, the captain beams out without a spacesuit and should be really dead. But luckily they find his pattern in like the memory, the hard drive, wherever it's stored, and they rematerialize him from that. So, yeah, anytime we lose a crew member off the Enterprise, couldn't we just reconstitute them from their last saved pattern? I mean, yes. So let's move on quickly and not talk about that too much.
And they bury it. In the writer's defense, there was a little bit of a ticking clock in that episode, because it's like, if we got to work quickly or the pattern will degrade, and maybe that's how they sidestep it. But there should have been more resources if that were a thing, and the fact that this works, there should have been more research
think about
into that. Yeah.
Why didn't Bruce Maddox just, instead of taking Data apart, go find his pattern, reconstitute his pattern, and take that? Anyways, let's move on. Let's move on to Enterprise interiors. Riker's quarters, my friend. Those of you who are watching us on YouTube, you can check out some stills we were able to pull. We are in Riker's quarters right now, talking about relieving Picard of duty. Look at that really nice. Is that a rock? Some sort of like, I don't even know what that is. A really nice geological specimen there that he has put on his breakfast table. And then on the other side of his quarters, we have Troy hanging out, and I guess Riker is a fan of models and has a very large model of a shuttlecraft. Well, it's huge.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that thing's colossal. I mean, look at how big that is. That's like the size of Troy's head times 3. So I love this set, crew quarters set interior here with some really goofy props. I hope we see that rock again. I'm going to be keeping an eye out for it for the rest of the time we watch this. So that's my Enterprise interior of the episode. I love this starship. Riker's quarters look, I guess, kind of comfortable. But I think that giant model is absurd and also amazing.
It's a way of saving costs, and for whoever bought that on Christie's, because Christie's is about 15 years ago. Christie's auction house completely auctioned off all the props that were used on classic Star Trek, from original series to Voyager and Nemesis, and I wonder where that ended up, because my goodness. All right.
Nice. Okay, any other closing thoughts on Lonely Among Us, or are we about to beam out of this episode?
We're about to beam out, but I want it said, in the context of the first 7 episodes we watched, this is one of my favorites because of its thought-provoking, don't know where it's going to go, an attempt at bringing conflict between the characters in a way that doesn't break Roddenberry's 10 Commandments. They're few and far between, and this episode works pretty well. So, do you have anything else, dear scholar?
You know, I certainly do not. I'm still looking at the picture of the absurdly large model behind Troy, and they had to put something in the background. I'm glad it was that. They made a good choice. Definitely. All right, we ready to move on to episode 8?
Yep, with 3 minutes to spare, so let's beam out.
Excellent.
And now we are transitioning to Justice. Now, Scholar Beta, while I reset the transporter, take it away on this one.
Well, let's get in now to episode 8 of Star Trek The Next Generation, Justice, stardate 41255.6. So, in this episode, the Enterprise D makes first contact with a planet of, wait for it, all white people who are both socially liberal, but also arbitrarily cruel, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And this entire planet is ruled by an orbital, semi-transparent spaceship known as God. Okay, hey, pretty straightforward premise here. We're going to make first contact with a group of kind of primitive people, and there's actually a technological ruler that they don't know about, pulling strings behind the scene. So what genres are we getting here? Basically, it's planetary adventure, maybe planetary melodrama. Kind of has the trappings of space opera, if you ask me. But then more specifically, some tropes we're going to get into and look at. We've got another monoracial species, but this time it's all white people with blonde hair, which is really problematic, and we're going to talk about that when we get into things that don't work. We also have a very sexually liberated open species, which we're going to kind of see time and time again in Star Trek, I suppose, to contrast the 80s kind of reserved American culture. It was American culture reserved in the 80s, Captain? I don't even remember. But anyways, and then finally the last trope, we have a godlike alien. When we get to talking about some behind the scenes stuff, well, I guess maybe at the end of the episode, actually, when we talk about firsts, we'll talk about that model or prop they use for the godlike alien. It's one of my favorites of all time. It's going to come back in another favorite episode. So that's what we have. A first contact with a monoracial group of people that are arbitrarily cruel, and we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. So what's going on behind the scenes in this episode, Captain? Tell us a little bit about its development.
So this was the second episode script that was bought by Paramount after Encounter at Farpoint. Its story bears little resemblance to what was actually aired. The original conflict of the episode revolved around a quote unquote red shirt security officer named
Oh,
Tenson. Yep. Accidentally going into one of the punishment zones of this seemingly perfect establishment where he's accidentally killed while protecting two children. The plot thickens where Picard realizes there's a civil war of sorts between rebels in the punishment zone and the council led by a character named Tibor. The rebels are led by somebody named Reneg. I don't think either of these characters actually show
no.
up by name in the show. Um, Picard does not interfere because of the Prime Directive, but the rebels still win and install their own totalitarian government. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The script's original author, John D.F. Black, actually used a pseudonym in the credits because the finished product bore absolutely no resemblance to the original script that was purchased. And as a person who's been in situations like that before on a project, I can understand that. So
Wow.
definitely.
Okay, let's talk about this for 1 second because this is honestly a way better premise. This kind of civil war conflict that's going on this planet. That's a little more interesting than what we get, which is not interesting at all. But I don't know. It seems like that's a really ambitious script too. We have a civil war, we have punishment zone, we have a first contact mission. Then we're going to have a group take over, and then they're going to install their own totalitarian. That's like a lot to accomplish in 44 minutes, you know? So I can totally understand why once we got to like a shooting script, maybe things start changing, but wow, do they change for the worse, I would say. So, Captain, let's get into. We actually kind of have a longer list of things that work here, but let's get into that before we start really breaking this episode down in terms of what does not work. What works?
So, from my perspective, there are two character moments, or two characters have a chance to shine in this episode. Picard, you see the first proper Picard speech at the climax of the episode where he says, "There can be no justice as long as laws are absolute."
Hmm.
Yeah, you can take a look at a little bit more into his psyche as a commander. Data asks him the question of, is one life more important than 1,000? To which Picard replies, I refuse to let arithmetic decide questions like that, which completely,
Interesting.
undercuts the needs of the many, needs of the few.
Yes.
Max the best
Yes.
Star Trek.
I'm seeing Spock in my mind's eye. I'm sorry, Captain. Keep going.
Definitely. No, that's all good. And it's also a good exploration of Data. There's an exchange between Data and Picard. After the information transfer later on in the episode, the god creature, god entity, which looks like a giant soap bubble, connects itself. Even in the Blu-ray, it looks like a giant soap bubble.
Yes, it does.
Connects itself to Data, and for some time exchanges information. And Picard accuses Data of quote unquote babbling, and how Data responds is something that really speaks to me even now. Because whether the writers are intending to do this or not, Data's character captures a lot of the thought processes and behaviors of somebody on the spectrum. We discussed this last episode with the fine motor skills with the Chinese finger puzzle. But Data replies with, it may be that from time to time I have considerable information to communicate, and you may question the way in which I organize it. I was watching that this week, and I was sitting there going, that's the spectrum in a nutshell there. The information is there. It just may not be presented in the best way. So I bring this up because it's unclear as to whether they intentionally do it that way, intentionally have Data represent people on the spectrum. But when they actually try to do it with later characters, Barclay comes to mind, and Tilly from Discovery, they do a better job with Data than they ever do when they actually quote unquote try to do it. So that's what works for me in this episode.
You know, I want to jump on that idea of giving Picard a chance to shine. I completely agree. I think to be perfectly honest, there's only a couple of scenes in here that really work for me, and they're both on the Enterprise. And so the first one I'm thinking of is roughly in Act 4, I want to say. This is when Picard decides to show one of the characters, Riven, her homeworld from space. And I think it's just a really nice moment. We're actually going to get something very similar to this in a favorite episode of mine called Who Watches the
Mhm.
Watchers? Yeah, yeah. But it's just a great moment where someone realizes that, yeah, they're in a much smaller piece of a bigger picture. And I just think the woman's acting, her name is Brenda Baki. She does a great job showing reverence to a floating space god that definitely isn't there. She's definitely just looking at a green screen. And I just think it's a nice little moment, where basically all the ideas in the episode come together. Yes, these are kind of a primitive people. Yes, they're worshiping this floating satellite space station thing, whatever it is. Its scale is kind of hard to decipher. I think it's massive, but other times it kind of
Mhm.
shows up as a little smaller. Um, so I think that's really nice. And then there's a really nice scene between Picard, Data, and Crusher in the Starboard Lounge. We'll talk about that in a little bit later, where they're discussing the Prime Directive. And it ends with Picard's assurance that he's not going to let Wesley die, which I think is a nice moment between Picard and Crusher. It definitely, Gates McFadden does a good job of showing a lot of stress and tension and sadness about what could befall her son. And I think Patrick Stewart does a nice job as Picard comforting her there. Picard
Yeah.
doesn't comfort people very well. That's kind of his theme of his in this first season, right? And so that's a nice
Mhm.
moment there. Um, so yeah, that I feel like that those moments are pretty nice. And then this larger idea of colonization is explored, right? Like Starfleet, they're colonizers. They go around to planets and they drop their people on those planets and they say thrive, go for it. And I don't know, that's got a really negative history on our own planet, in our own history. And so it's interesting that they're exploring that. And at the end of the episode, they remove one of their colonies. So this is a really interesting look at colonization in the future. And what Starfleet's practices are around that. And we're actually going to get into a bunch of scrapes with colonies being in the wrong or right spot. Well, usually the wrong
Oh
spot, I
yeah.
would say.
Usually the wrong.
So,
Yep.
yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think colonization is something that we definitely need to talk about. I know you all talk about it in your history classes. But yeah, it's got a vicious legacy in our society, and I just think it's interesting that Star Trek explores that. So
Definitely.
let's jump over now. We alluded to the fact that a lot of stuff doesn't work in this episode, or at least I have been. Captain, why don't you get us started?
So there are two things that don't work. There's two categories of things that don't work. There's mechanical parts on the part of the story that don't work, and then there are things that were chosen at a particular time in history which do not age very well at all. Um, so first of all, the story mechanics. I used the term last episode. I'm going to use it again. This is an idiot plot. This is
Yes,
an
it
idiot
is.
plot. This entire episode would not have happened if two things had played out differently. If Yar had actually done research on the justice system of the planet, specifically the punishment, there are things called punishment zones. You would
Mm-hmm.
think that that would be worth looking into. Doesn't do that. That would have been a red flag. Also, the Edo boy who throws Wesley the ball, Wesley Crusher, because as we talked about briefly, the Enterprise comes across this planet. Wesley commits some sort of cultural transgression and should be put to death. And the entire reason why that happens shouldn't have, because if the Edo boy truly knew the punishment zones,
Yeah, if he knew his own
he
laws.
would have thrown the ball at a different way. Now, if you had written it differently, you could have gotten around that. But as written, as presented, from a story mechanical sense, it should not have happened in the logic of the story. If you're a civilization where your very life depends on not being in a certain place, you would know
Mm-hmm.
and would avoid it. So that's the idiot plot, and I am preemptively awarding the "You Fool" award an award given to characters whose nonsensical actions only happen so the plot can happen. The first prize winner is the Edo Boy, and honorable mention is Yar, because yeah, that shouldn't have happened at all. Now, what ages terribly, and as what you pointed out, was the demographics of the people on the planet, the specific complexions of the individuals send some very disturbing overtones, and I think you might want to expand on that a little bit. You've got more notes on that than I do.
Yeah, I want to talk about this because this is something that actually comes up when I teach science fiction a lot, honestly, is monoracial cultures. And whether the creators of the science fiction, did they mean to make everyone white? Was that their goal? Or is that just something hanging out in their subconscious? Because both are kind of disturbing. So let's talk about this for just a second. And you know what's funny, Captain? We haven't really mentioned Wesley, and this is supposed to be a Wesley episode, but because this issue of the Edo people being all white and this supposedly being a paradise, because this is so jarring, it's really hard to talk about the plot. So, basically, this episode centers around this absurd justice system where, on the surface, it looks like it's this very liberal planet where everyone's getting along and we're all giving each other massages and we're all just having a great time. However, randomly, at a certain place on the planet, a punishment zone can be put up, and any transgression in said zone immediately results in death. So just what? Yeah, how that happens, why that exists, just is very hard for me to wrap my mind around. It just seems horribly arbitrary. It's also incredibly random, like both where the punishment zone exists and the fact that that's how their justice system works. And they appeal to the past, and they say, oh God, thanks, before the punishment zones, before this justice system where we executed people for very minute crimes, things were just so bad. It just was so horrible on this planet until we came up with this system. And you got to ask yourself, what? How did this random justice system actually get you to where you want to be? It doesn't make any sense, my friend. Okay, so that's the one thing. This absurd justice system is very dumb. I don't like it at all. It doesn't seem advanced in any way, shape, or form. And then I want to go and address the fact that all the people on this planet are all white. So my students, we read an essay called How Long Till Black Future Month by an amazing writer named N.K. Jemisin. If you don't know her, check out her work. It's really incredible. And Jemisin has this awesome quotation I want to read about her, a Black science fiction writer, realizing there aren't a lot of characters that look like her in the science fiction she's absorbing. She says, the roles Black characters took were limited, non-threatening to the writer's sense of superiority. This would be a white writer. The thug, the slave, the exotic sex toy. If I wanted to see people like me doing things I could relate to, I had to look to my own. Then again, most of what I found from creators of color went to the opposite extreme, probably in an attempt to counter the extreme whiteness everywhere else. But I wasn't any more interested in all Black futures than I was in all white futures. I just wanted fantasies of exploration and enchantment that didn't slap me in the face with "you don't belong here" messages. I just wanted to be able to relax and dream. I mean, I love this idea. And if you think about the original series and its diverse cast, that basically is giving and delivering on what Jemisin wanted, right? But then if you think about the setting of this planet, it is the opposite. It's back to that all white, and maybe the writer's trying to make a point, but it definitely doesn't come off that way. I don't know if we're supposed to be, I don't think we're supposed to be sympathetic of this civilization, but at the same time, I'm not really sure what tone we're supposed to read from it. Because Picard doesn't really condemn them. No. I mean, their justice system, but not the fact that they're all white people. Okay, so I want to close on this thought with one more idea from Jemisin. Jemisin says, and she's talking about a reader now, as a reader of fantasy and science fiction in the present. She says, it doesn't matter which book I'm reading. I could name you a dozen others just like it. This isn't a magical medieval Europe. It's some white supremacist neo-feudalist fantasy of same. And I'm so sick of it that I put the book down and opened my laptop to start writing. So it's basically she's saying that, yeah, there's this phenomenon is still going on today. Where writers are creating these quote unquote fantasy worlds, but they're full of people that all look the same, and they don't have any space for people who look like Jemison or other folks of color. So that is, I just, if I can appreciate this episode for anything, it's that we can bring up and talk about this concept of a fantasy of the same. I love that phrase that she uses, fantasy of same, because that's what's going on the Edo planet. So yeah, that's my read of this. I think it's really important for people to kind of look into the setting of these fantastical worlds and realize they can be whatever the writer wants, and to really question the decisions the writer makes when they populate the worlds. I think that's an incredibly important thing for science fiction writers to think about and science fiction consumers.
And you had brought up something
So,
I want to
yes,
capitalize on
please.
just a little bit, dear scholar. You had used the expression something about manifestation of the writer's subconscious.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's something to be said in that, and I think that the demographics of these characters represent that perhaps more than anything else. It's they don't know what they don't know. Case in point, if I were to give credit, because predominantly in Star Trek, from the original series all the way to the Kurtzman era, you have a predominant non-person of color, writing staff, directorial staff, etc. If I were to give
Yep.
credit where credit is due, I have been critical of Kurtzman era Star Trek, but to give credit where credit is due, and this is something I wholeheartedly applaud. Hanelle Culpepper is the first African American woman to direct a Star Trek episode. She did a couple episodes of Picard, if my research is correct, and she that was 2000, what, 1920.
Yeah.
So
It's taken a minute, hasn't it? Yeah.
it has. So it's great that we're progressing in that direction. It's just it's been the norm for 40 of the 50 years, 50 of the 60 years that Star Trek has been around. So that's definitely something to be said. So, are you ready for first some facts on this episode?
Let's do it. I've got one. You've got one. You start us off.
Wonderful. So, first some facts. Data describes the Eidos God spacecraft as the God Thing. This is most likely an episode to one of the early drafts of Star Trek: The Next Generation, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, of the same name, the God Thing. It involves an alien spacecraft intelligence floating around from one civilization to the other, demanding worship or it will die. Now, yeah, Roddenberry was an outspoken atheist. I can definitely see his overtones on this one. Now, you had a couple things, Scholar Beta, to bring up here.
Oh yeah. So the Edo God space station thing, whatever it is, it's going to come back in season 5 as the Lysinian Central Command building in one of my favorite episodes called Conundrum with First Officer McDuff. I hope the captain's yacht has enough sustainability to get us to some of these amazing episodes that I'm talking about.
I hope so.
I think it is. We got a great fuel supply. Anyways, so I think it's a gorgeous model. I love it. I think it works here, okay-ish. It really could have been anything. But I just think, it's a really nice looking prop, and I'm excited for it to come back in season 5. And I'll also say that the Rubicon 3 setting is actually, we're going to see it a whole bunch too. It's it's from something called the Tillman Water Reclamation Plant in California. And it's going to be mixed in with a variety of matte paintings to show some Starfleet buildings and like tubes and other stuff like that on the planet's surface. So yeah, the surface of this planet is going to come back as Starfleet Academy. So that's kind of cool. How about some awards, my friend?
It's also, very quickly, if you're a fan of the Bill and Ted universe, the Tillman Water Reclamation Plant is also where Bill and Ted University is. So, on to episode awards. We talked about the You Fool Award. The Edo Boy gets it. Nonsensically basically throwing a ball into the forbidden, or excuse me, the punishment zone so the episode can happen. Yar gets honorable mention there. Also, the Picard Facepalm Award. The scene in which, if you may remember, is an award given to something that's painfully awkward for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
And the scene in which the Enterprise away team meets the Edo is profoundly cringeworthy for all the
Yes.
actors. Everybody looks visibly uncomfortable. I don't know if that's intentional or not. I think you got some matte paintings to deal with here, Scholar.
Yeah, no, I just want to say on that point, yeah, the costuming is so bad. It is so bad. Anyway, so let's just move on from that. I just already talked about the no matte painting is actually going to take place here, but in the future, they're going to get mixed in to the Tillman water plant background to form Starfleet Academy, just like I was saying earlier. I actually want to jump to Enterprise interiors. We're going to get something called the Starboard Lounge in this, and the Starboard Lounge. And I think that's really fascinating that they're just kind of like hangout spots all over the Enterprise. Let's go hang out on the starboard side. Let's go hang out on the port side. Let's go hang out on 10 forward, 9 forward, whatever it is. I like that they put a lot of like places to hang out. So Data and Picard are hanging out in the Starboard Lounge. They're looking at the Edo God space station thing. And this is so obviously a crew quarter redress, but I like it. It looks comfortable. You can see Data and Picard lounging over there in that first screen capture that I was able to pull. And then again, we get a reverse angle where they're both looking out at the Edo space station thing. And Picard definitely looks like he's lounging there. So yeah, that's my Enterprise interior. I don't think it's going to ever come back. But hey, I'll be keeping an eye out for it in case it does.
Awesome. Well, that's a good thing to bring up because I think a lot of those go away when 10 forward comes available, but that's only a season 2 thing.
You're absolutely right about that. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Actually, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and it saves money too. The various lounges and then building that set. Do we have anything else to say before beam out? We got 5 minutes.
I just want to give I just want to give a shout out to N.K. Jemisin. Go check out her work. Go check out her essay work and her fiction. It's awesome.
Awesome. Gonna look at it myself. With that said, are we ready for beam out?
Captain, I think we are. I think we covered the points we need to make in this amazing air quotes episode.
Awesome. Let's beam out. There we go. All right. While I'm resetting the transporter, let's talk about our third and final episode for our time together today. The battle.
So, hey, and thank you for sticking with us. Those of you who are hanging out on the regular cut of the episode, who've hung out with us for all 60 minutes so far, we appreciate you. So here we go. Without further ado, Episode 9 of Star Trek The Next Generation, The Battle, taking place on Stardate 41723.9. So The Battle is an episode where Picard, slowly falling under the mind control of Ferengi Damon Bach, attacks his own crew aboard the bridge of his old starship, the Stargazer. Dun dun dun. So the genre here, we are dealing with mystery, and because it involves some mind control, some psychological thriller, and I'm putting thriller in the biggest air quotes of all time because we're going to talk about how slow this episode is. Mm-hmm. The tropes, we have another mind control trope, just like Lonely Among Us, except instead of blue electricity that controls your mind, now it's a red, roughly beach ball sized device that I have no idea how it works. It's not important, I suppose. And then the other trope that I love, and I love this trope from childhood, but it's the convoluted revenge plot. I mean, this is a very convoluted revenge plot. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but honestly, this episode is it's pretty focused around this concept of Picard reuniting with the Stargazer. There's not a lot of other kind of plots or things going on in this piece. It's pretty centrally focused. So Yeah. Let's talk about a little bit of behind the scenes. And you're going to start off by telling us a little bit about this episode's former title, which I completely agree with you. I like quite a bit better than quote unquote the battle,
Yeah,
because that makes it seem like this is going to be action. And this is not
far from
action.
it.
No.
Far from it. So the original title of this episode was Ghost Ship. I like that title better. With that in mind, extra scenes were written to explore the Ferengi culture because, as we mentioned, the Ferengi are featured here. They were featured in Last Outpost. Kind of got a bad rap on that one. They attempted to correct here. The scenes were written, but they were never filmed. Um, this is another, well, this is an attempt at saving costs, but it goes the other way. Originally,
Mm.
the Stargazer was supposed to be a redress of the Enterprise A from Star Trek The Voyage Home. Um, but then they decided that they could build this new ship using twice the amount of nacelles, twice the amount of warp engines. Um, but they were put into a bind because they originally wrote and filmed the episode with it being a Constitution class, which is what the original Enterprise is. So they had to come up with a new name that would work well for overdub. And because Geordi LaForge clearly says into the camera Constitution class, they did a dub and they needed something that started with C. So they said Constellation class instead. So if you watch that episode
Nice.
really closely in that scene, you can see that there's an overdub. So
Nice.
with that in mind, what works here, if you take a look at any example of public history in Star Trek The Next Generation, everybody involved talks about this pivotal point happening in the history of production where they departed from central ensemble stories and in favor of more character focused stories. And I would argue that this is the first attempt to do that. You're going to see that again with Worf in a later episode where it's done, I would argue, slightly better. But they try it here with Picard, where it's very clearly one person, one cast member is the clear protagonist of the story, and the plot revolves around them. So this is very much a Picard story. It's expansion on his backstory. He's in a vulnerable state, a state where he's unwillingly doing something against the wishes of his crew, which was something we saw in Lonely Among Us.
Yep.
Yep. Captain of the Stargazer, the tragic history and somewhat tragic backstory of Picard himself. There's something that could have worked a lot better, but it's heavily implied. We don't see it as much as we should, where he second guesses the choices he made as a young man, which I think is a really good. They come back to that again in the episode Tapestry later on in the
Oh,
show.
yeah.
But yeah, but there's hints at that in this episode, and that is what, from my perspective, works for me. So, dear scholar, what say you on that?
Okay, so I'm actually thinking about this honestly from a writing standpoint. It's fascinating that you say this is kind of a shift where they go to writing about a character, where they really focus tightly on one character instead of giving everyone something to do in every episode. And honestly, I think it really shows because this is probably one of the most tightly focused, thematically focused episodes we've had so far. And its focus is the past, which is, again, why I like that title, Ghost Ship. That's the battle doesn't really lend itself to the idea about the past as much as Ghost Ship does. It also adds to that era of mystery too. So really missed the boat with this title. So again, we got this thematic focus on the past. First, we learn about Picard's past Starfleet service, right? As the episode continues, we get both the Stargazer and the episode metaphorically exploring loss in the past. We explore the idea of the Damon's son, who was killed in a battle with Picard, and we explore the idea of the Stargazer, which was lost, killed, quote unquote, in that same Ferengi battle. So both characters, Damon Bach, Jean-Luc Picard, they're dealing with something that they've lost in their past. The main difference seems to be, to me, where I'm seeing the difference between these characters is the Picard is at peace with the past. I think he even says something about he hasn't thought about the Stargazer in such and such amount of time. I wish I would have written that down. But Damon Bach is not at peace, somewhat understandably, with the past. And so, therefore, Bach uses his mind control device to disrupt the peace Picard has with his past, making him second guess his decisions while he was briefly in command of the Stargazer there. So, yeah, I like this one. From a writing standpoint, I think we are really focusing on a thematic issue, the past. We're really focusing on two characters, Picard and Bach, and contrasting them. I think that works really nicely. And then on top of that, man, we have a lovely model in the Stargazer. We have a lovely set redress in the Stargazer's bridge. We have a lovely backstory with Picard having to take control of the Stargazer, performing the Picard maneuver, which is amazing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then how he had to abandon ship and float in shuttlecraft until they were picked up and rescued. So I think that's all really nice. And in fact, expanding the captain's backstory is probably the best part of this episode. The fact that we get the Stargazer and how cool the Stargazer is actually way cooler than the episode itself. Like the ideas and the concepts in them. So yeah, I think that's really what's cool in going for this one. I guess I do want to point out the Picard maneuver too, and how I think it is hilarious that the Picard maneuver is both this way to jump to light speed really quickly and then make your ship appear like it's in two places at once, so the enemy vessel doesn't know where to fire. And then also, more informally, the Picard maneuver is pulling down on your uniform so it looks all nice and taut before you go into an official situation. So I love both of those ideas, and the Picard maneuver feels real. I mean, the starship tactic, that feels like an actual real starship tactic. I wish maybe it could have come back in another clever way somewhere down the line. We will get like a Riker maneuver, and I don't think there are any. We might have a Beverly Crusher maneuver, when she hides in the sun's corona. Yeah, but I like that various crew members are going to have their time to shine and show that they know how to use the Enterprise to its full effects. And I think the Picard maneuver gets that kicked off. So I think that's really cool. You have any thoughts on the maneuver itself? Do I care way too much about that?
No, I like it a lot, and they kind of do bring it back, sort of, in the finale of Picard season 1. They do bring up, they do bring up wanting to do the Picard maneuver, and he says we don't have technobabble thing, and then
I have no memory of that, and I just watched all of that.
Yeah, well, that's a testimony of how that show was done. But yeah, she says that the Dr. Girardi, the cyberneticist, says we could really use some Picard maneuvers right about now. To which Picard replies, "We would need some sort of technobabble thing." And then she pulls out the holographic thing and says, "You mean like this?" And then, yeah. But they do attempt to bring that back, and I do want to bring, there is a day of reckoning for Picard. I want to make sure our viewers understand my perspective on Picard, but that's a discussion for another time. You bring up the Picard maneuver, and I got to bring up that was done. It was coined that after the costume change. I'm pretty sure after the costume change in season 3, because it went from a one-piece spandex suit to a two-piece suit, because Patrick Stewart's chiropractor said you cannot continue shooting this show in spandex. It hurts your back too much.
Interesting.
So, yeah. I just wanted to bring that up. Go ahead.
Okay, question. It is Data who solves the Picard maneuver, quote unquote, right? Or is it Riker? Help me. I just had a blank on this. Because remember, Riker turns to Data and says, "Data, we need to figure out a way to counter the Picard maneuver." And Data says, "There are none such counter moves known." And then I think Riker says something to the effect of, "Figure it out right now." And then he does. So I think it's also clever that Data is the first one to do it. I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Not sure if it's commentary, but it's something.
You had mentioned when's the next time it's going to be used, and because of my frustration with Picard, I actually write the Picard maneuver in one of the episodes that I rewrote. If people are interested in that, I can maybe make a video essay explaining that. So, with all that said, do you want to discuss what doesn't work?
Yes. I guess I'll start with just Bach's convoluted revenge scheme.
Yeah.
I get why you have to have a convoluted revenge scheme when you're the writer. You got to give your antagonist something to do. You got to make them seem really intelligent, like they've put all the pieces together, like they're 5 moves ahead. But here's where all those things fail. It would have been easier to just take a phaser and shoot Picard and kill him that way. You know what I'm saying? It's just like it eventually the believability, the bottom just falls out of that, and it. Yeah, Captain, what do you think? Yeah,
It's the James Bond villain problem.
Yes.
It's the James Bond villain problem. Overly elaborate and exotic death, but at the same time, an easily escapable situation.
Yes, exactly. And so that's the first thing that doesn't really, and this is like 9 years in the making. The quote unquote Battle of Maxia was 9 years ago. So this guy's been thinking about his poor son's passing for 9 years. And instead of, getting some therapy on Betazoid or Betazed, he puts together this, I guess Ferengis actually, their minds can't be written, they can't be read by Betazoids. So, and I'm going to back up from that idea. Anyways, yeah, instead of doing anything else productive in the 9 years, like making a profit Ferengi style, he actually goes against Ferengi culture and gives away this salvage starship and enters into this really convoluted revenge scheme. And it just doesn't work for me at all. And then when you have the convoluted scheme on top of the thought control device, which is officially called, get ready for it, the Thought Maker, it just, I don't know, none of that works. You could have just given him the Stargazer, and then as soon as in booby trap it, so as soon as they beam aboard, it blows up, or something terrible happens, or maybe you could have just taken remote control of Stargazer and shot at them from a distance and make them chase it into a terrible nebula and then have something. I mean, I know you can't kill Picard, otherwise you wouldn't have a TV show, but I'm just saying there are so many other ways to get revenge that are way simpler and more effective. And so, yeah, it's hard for me to watch episodes like that and be like, that's a smart Ferengi right there. That's a really smart Ferengi. But what about you, my friend? What doesn't work about this? Besides the horribly tedious pace. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal your first line, but that's...
No, it's good. The pace is bad, and I would argue they tried too hard. They tried too hard with the introspection on Picard. His descent into madness, they try really hard. The headache thing gave me a headache.
Yes.
Maybe that's some sort of new special effect they were trying out. The attempt to sell the Ferengi as sinister, I guess, works somewhat better, but it falls out.
Yeah,
as slightly. This is something where I think adding a B plot that actually relates to the story would work a lot better, because Jack Crusher, the deceased spouse of Dr. Crusher, was a fellow crewman on the Stargazer. And you can't do anything with that. Yeah. You couldn't do anything with that. You couldn't examine Picard's, relationship, especially with that deep fake sort of thing where they falsify the log and basically the implication, which nominates that plot point for an award that I'm going to explain later. You can't do anything with that. The fact that Crusher's spouse might have died because of Picard's potential mistake, and you can't do anything with that. Go ahead.
Wouldn't it be interesting if Bach actually forged Jack Crusher's logs and then made them contradict Picard's memory, and then Beverly hears these and is all of a sudden, oh my gosh, did you... Yeah, but also the deepfakes thing we know doesn't work. There's one amazing episode of Deep Space Nine where they go to incredible lengths to create a deepfake, and it doesn't even work. So it's like, yeah, it just doesn't work. It never has really worked. So
having that kind of B plot would have worked really well, I think, or perhaps putting Picard on trial because of this new evidence, because it's not really established that, so in the interest of world building, this false Picard log is new evidence that could be completely damning to Picard and end his career. You can't do anything with that either. It's resolved in 10 minutes.
Yeah,
because exactly. Of the technology you brought up. So that, from my perspective, this is something where you could use more plot than less. or a B plot to enrich Dr. Crusher's character, particularly because in the logic of the story, her deceased husband, and Picard were shipmates, and that could have done. But then again, bringing that up would have violated Roddenberry's commandment of no tension and no jealousy and no this and no that. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, you're right. You're right. As cool as those commandments or whatever we want to call them from Roddenberry are, they really definitely get in the way of telling compelling character-driven stories from my point of view. But we'll see. We'll see. Um,
definitely.
Captain, you want to get to your award? Oh, I guess we already we got to that with that subplot. That's right.
Well,
That's
I didn't officially name it, but do you want me to do facts and facts first?
I'm all over the place, just kind of like the
Okay.
Lonely Among Us. But yeah, let's back up. Let's back up. Trek first and fast. Let's do it.
So the Stargazer Bridge is a fairly obvious redress of the USS Enterprise A.
Mm-hmm.
You take a look at the turbo lift, and it looks like the turbo lift in Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. And the built-in consoles and the displays look like something from that you see at the very end of Enterprise, the Voyage Home with the Starship Enterprise A. The optics are changed a little bit, but it's very clearly that structure. That's what I got for first and facts. Do you, dear scholar, have anything else?
No first and facts on my side. Let's go awards.
So I got the award, the GNDN award. Now, there's a little bit of an inside joke here. GNDN is what they used to write on the original show on any kind of piping or networking system. And it
That's
basically
right.
means, yep, goes nowhere, does nothing. So this is an award given to a story detail or plot device that is established but is of no consequence, has no consequence whatsoever. And that award goes to the fake log them tree subplot. It's brought up, has some colossal implications for Picard's career, and resolved in the next act. Not even at the end, in the next act. So the
Yeah.
ultimate goes nowhere, does nothing.
You almost kind of wonder if the episode came in like at 38 minutes, 36 minutes, and they're like, uh-oh. We need it. We need something because a B plot definitely is usually established in the teaser or act one,
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you think about the last episode, Justice, it's basically meant the B plot's kind of the floating starship and the godlike starship until they figure out what it is, and it's basically name dropped in the teaser. Oh, there's this thing
Mm-hmm.
coming off the starboard, side, starboard nacelle, and so yeah, that's it was established so quickly and then solved so quickly. It's hardly even a B plot. Um, okay, let's talk about Enterprise interiors. We have one of my favorite Enterprise interiors. I'm going to say that a lot. All these interiors are some of my favorites. The captain's quarters. That's where our episode starts, and I think it's a beautiful, beautiful set. We're going to spend a lot of time here. Um, in fact, we're going to have a really long discussion in season 2 about the Prime Directive and the episode Pen Pals.
Oh, yeah.
But also, okay, what I like about this interior, one, like I said, we're going to come back here. They're going to update it. Picard's chair is going to get that Mendakin, I think that's how you say it, tapestry that's going to go
Oh,
over the
yeah.
chair, which is going to be awesome. So really pointing out some details that are about to get updated. What else do I like about this? Oh yeah, I think thematically this is a nice set because Crusher is going to enter in, and we're going to have the opening episode conversation in the captain's personal quarters with the doctor and the captain, who in season 1 they're trying to drum up some relationships, some chemistry there. So I appreciate that it's going to happen, and then eventually, they're going to actually keep doing that, and they're going to have the two of them eat breakfast together, and that's going to occur in the captain's quarters, and it's also going to occur. I actually don't know if it occurs in Crusher's quarters or not. We'll have to pay attention to see if
Yeah.
breakfast goes down there. So we're going to be spending a lot of time in this space. I really love it, and yeah, it's going to get updated and continually used throughout the season. Unlike the old Starboard Lounge, which is never going to be seen again, sadly.
Yeah. R.I.P. Starboard Lounge. So,
Facts.
yeah, there you go. I'm borrowing what my students say. So, I this is an episode that is a good first start. for setting a new convention for the show. It just could be done a lot better, and it will be done better. The episode with Worf involving the Klingons that are a couple episodes ahead of us, I think, when we get to that. That's one of my favorites of the first season. I'm looking forward to that. So I'm thinking it's time to wrap it up, unless you have anything else to say, dear scholar.
No, I've got the list of episodes we're going to talk about next week, and I'm looking at them right now, and I'm seeing a Riker episode and another. You know what I'm saying? So I'm thinking I understand this formula that you just introduced. Instead of the ensemble, we're going to go to the individual. So that's fascinating. Shall I take us into that? What we're going to talk about next week?
Take us out.
So next week we are going to tackle Hide and Q, Haven, and The Big Goodbye. So that's pretty. Those are some very memorable episodes. Get ready for that. Where you have a return of Q, for the first time. So that will be quite interesting to talk about his next appearance, because he was definitely one of the best parts of that pilot. Let's see if that remains true for Hide and Q.
Looking forward to it. Can't wait. With that in mind, I think we should wrap this up with thank yous and mahalo nui loas. Scholar, would you like to take us out on that?
Yeah, just want to once again give a shout out to Memory Alpha. I failed last week to mention that when I was in college, I got into being an editor for Memory Alpha as I was getting really, really into TNG. So I appreciate everyone who contributes to that community. It's an amazing community. Really helps me fact check some of the things that I'm taking notes on. So thank you so much for that. Also, a shout out to Trek Core for their scripts, their screen caps, especially those Blu-ray caps, so I can compare and contrast what I'm seeing to what other folks are seeing. And of course, to all our new subscribers and our former subscribers, listeners, commenters, we can't do this without you. We appreciate the direction you're giving us, some of the feedback as well, and yeah, it's been real. Thank you for joining us on the Captain's Yacht. We're about to park back with the main ship, but before we do that, Captain Kanaka, you got anything else you want to say?
Big mahalo nui loa. Thank you so much, as they say in Hawaiian. Really excited for this new frontier we're doing. Just to echo what our resident scholar said, thank you to all our listeners, and thank you, Memory Alpha, and thank you, Trek Core, for everything. Mahalo nui loa. With that in mind, live long and prosper. E malama pono. Be safe, be healthy.
Peace, and long life. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you.
At Scholar Beta signing off.
Captain Kanaka, Monaco Enterprises also signing off.